Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Joe Patrick on football. Not a normal episode of the show today, I'll tell you that, because we're going to get kind of philosophical about some things. And it's not been a normal day for Falcons fans who have had to go through one of the most painful, excruciating 24-hour periods. And there's been some bad ones, obviously, for Falcons fans, but just in terms of what today has meant for where this organization is, where they've been for the last X amount of years, and I think more importantly, kind of where they're going. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit later in the show today is like what is the path forward for the Atlanta Falcons? And we're not going to talk about I'll talk a little bit about some of the news of the day, but we're not going to talk about Raheem Morris's future, Terry Fontenot's future, because I think those things are. I think it's well understood what's going to happen there. We're not going to talk about the prospective head coaches. Not to say that this stuff isn't important. We will definitely be talking about it going forward. But that's not what today's going to be. Today's going to be some more big picture things to just think about. And I'm not sitting here today saying that I have the answers to some of the questions I'm going to be posing about where the Falcons are. But ultimately, the Falcons are going to have to, and when I say when the Falcons, I mean the leadership and the ownership, Arthur Blank, are going to have to ask themselves what is this organization? Where is it going? But first, let's get into the news of the day after the Falcons' bitterly disappointing loss to the Carolina Panthers yesterday that basically seals their fate of this season, where they blew a double-digit lead and lose to the Carolina Panthers in overtime. An overtime in which the fans that were in attendance had mostly left and didn't even care to watch. And, I hate to say that, I kind of understand the feeling. But it was not a heavily attended game from my eye. And the overtime was less energetic than what we were seeing, in the majority of that second half. Just a bitterly, it's almost not even like bitter. I know Falcons fans probably come to expect this kind of thing, and that's kind of part of the problem at this point. But, as part of that loss, you lose Michael Penix to what is reported to be a partial ACL tear. Now he's having a second opinion. But Raheem Morris even said today that, the second opinion is likely, it's by players' consent that they have that done. And usually their agent wants them to, have that looked at as well by somebody that's not a team doctor. But based on the reporting that's come out, we can safely assume that these are this is what's been seen by doctors affiliated with the team. And if he has a partial ACL tear, I know that Ian Rappaport and others have reported that potential reconstructive surgery could be part of repairing that tear, and who knows how much time that leaves Penix to recover. But I think that you'd be optimistic to think that he's back. Frankly, even like midway through next season or for next season, you're already, it's pretty devastating for a quarterback that, is in need of development as much as he is as a young quarterback in this league, for him to miss this amount of games that there is left to go in the season. I believe there's 7 games left, after having, not played the first year. Understandable that, he was going to kind of watch from the side and kind of understand the mental side of the game. But there's physical development also that needs to occur with Michael Penix to be a successful quarterback in this league. I think that he's going to have to learn to play under center, which I think we can safely conclude the coaches don't feel comfortable with him doing right now. And I know that you all have seen the footwork issues as of late and all of that stuff, accuracy, et cetera, et cetera. All of that is in need of improvement, and this injury leaves him unable to work physically, on these improvements. And that is devastating for this player. And especially when you project out when he does come back, he might not even have a full, seasons worth of starts in his career by the time he's going into his fourth NFL season. I mean, this is bad for the long term prognosis. But again, this is just kind of something we'll start to. We obviously are just kind of in maybe that shocked state when you talk about the stages of grief, and we'll continue to deal with that as things go on. But ultimately, it leaves the Falcons with Kirk Cousins as the starting quarterback for the rest of the season. Drake London also suffered an injury in Sunday's game against the Panthers. PCL sprain is what has been reported, and Raheem Morris confirmed the PCL nature of that today. Don't know exactly what that leaves, Drake, if he's going to be out 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I think the duration of his injury is, less significant, obviously, than the impact and the impact it has on his career as to what it is with Michael Penix right now. But obviously, just another blow for this team. And, this team is going to have basically the same offense trot out there that went out there against the Miami Dolphins at home and got smoked with Kirk Cousins as the quarterback and no Drake London in that game. And I asked Raheem Morris about that today, by the way, and he did, said that, and it's fair to say that could be different with Kirk kind of knowing that he's the starter going into the week head on, and he can kind of, they can game plan around him specifically, and he will do all the prep that he needs to do to get himself ready to play, where previously it was kind of in limbo. But still, I think with what we've seen from Kirk Cousins recently, it leaves no one optimistic about this team. And, obviously the season's, like I said earlier, the season's fate was kind of already sewn up with the loss on Sunday. So just a really, really kind of somber day, honestly, for Falcons fans. And you could see that in the building as well today. Just, it was kind of a pathetic environment there. I just, it's quiet. Obviously, Raheem Morris is a completely different demeanor at this point than he would have had earlier in the season. I think he understands that he's kind of in a lame duck situation. I know that there's been some people that have proposed the idea that he could potentially be around long term because things are such in the crapper that they'll just roll with him for maybe even another season potentially. I don't see that happening. I don't think that Raheem would even say that he sees that happening right now. But again, I think all of this is secondary to the main point of today's show, which is that the Falcons are at a crossroads. Like, this is, when you have the quarterback situation in flux like it is right now. It's kind of funny. I was actually thinking back to Kirk Cousins' introductory press conference where he talked about, these pillars of a football team. And when you have the ownership and the GM and the head coach and the starting quarterback kind of in unison, like singing from the same choir, singing from the same hymn sheet in unison, and functioning well, that's when you have the core of a good football team. And right now, I don't know if any of those four aspects of this team are like really, really functional right now. Obviously, we've talked about the quarterback situation. Raheem Morris, the head coach, is likely out of a job. If not soon, then certainly later. I think Terry Fontenot, the GM, you could say the same thing. By the way, I know that there's also been some kind of, and I did a podcast this offseason saying that Terry Fontenot is an underrated general manager. And I said that because I felt he was regarded as basically one of the worst general managers, and I'm sure a lot of people would say he is the absolute worst at this point in time, given the trade that he made that is now looking like it could be a top 10 pick, potentially even higher than that. I mean, honestly, the Falcons could even fully tailspin and completely collapse at this point. We'll see what happens there. But ultimately, there's going to be a ton of heat directed at the Falcons for having made that trade, even though we can think that it's still like a fine trade in terms of, you're still getting a piece that you needed that is helping you on defense with James Pierce Jr. and Xavier Watts was part of that deal as well. Those are functional players that are helping your defense, et cetera, but that's not the way the national media is going to see it, and that's going to create a talking point about the Falcons throughout the offseason. That is the reason why I believe it's a non-starter that Terry Fontenot is back as GM, because if he is, he would basically be in a position where he's having to defend that trade basically, and that would be kind of the story of the Falcons offseason, be the story of their draft season, no matter who they end up getting in the second, third, et cetera. They are going to make draft picks, but the story about that draft and the Falcons will be about the trade that he made. So I think that it would understandably be better for the organization to have someone who does not have that kind of baggage on their hands, and would have to deal with that and can say, listen, we're dealing with the situation as has been presented to us, et cetera, et cetera. But let's get back to this kind of, organization at the crossroads. And there are some, I think, strong parallels to something. There's a team in the NFL that was kind of known for its dysfunction, its inability to win, not a presence in the playoffs, not really a factor in the NFL conversation whatsoever. And that's kind of how the Falcons feel right now. And the team that I'm talking about is the Detroit Lions. And it's kind of crazy to think that that's where the Lions were at that point in time, but it is where they were. And by the way, they were also in the middle of some ownership transitions with, an aging owner who was handing off, ownership to different family members, et cetera, et cetera. And what the Lions did, they needed help. They after that 2020 season, they fired their GM and head coach, and they needed to go make new hires. But before they went out and hired their GM, their current GM Brad Holmes, and their current head coach Dan Campbell, who have been roaring successes, they made the most important hire they've made maybe in the entire history of that franchise, or at least in modern memory. And that would be Chris Spielman, who is a former Lions player, legendary Lions player, who has since been inducted into their Ring of Honor, whatever you call it there. Led the organization as all-time leader in tackles, et cetera, et cetera. Just a legendary figure there, but he was hired to be the assistant to the president of the organization. And it was a newly created position. It did not exist before, and his job was basically to give advice on everything. And he had no restraints on what aspects of the organization he could touch, and he remains in that position. And he does it kind of notably, if you're to ask around Detroit Lions circles, does it in a very humble way, no ego. Is almost, I would argue, is almost like in terms of like media and kind of having himself out there, kind of bashful in that sense. Like really does not want any part of that, but is just as a football guy can possibly be, and to the point where not only is he assisting the president and the ownership for hiring their successful leadership in terms of the GM and head coach, but he's also playing scout team linebacker in practice. He's got, he's a linebacker. He can offer some tips. Okay. But that's not all. He's also role playing with salespeople on how to sell season tickets. And he's basically playing the role of a skeptical potential buyer. As someone who knows the organization very well, has obviously played there for years, lived there, et cetera, and understands the fans in a very deep way. He's role playing with the salespeople. But that's not all. He's presenting Football 101 lectures, literally teaching about the fundamentals of football. What is a 4-3 over? Why does putting a man in motion, why do teams do that? He's presenting these kinds of lectures to their business people, to their business partners that are selling corporate sponsorships. That's not it. He's actually having the cheerleaders do tackle drills. They're hitting tackling dummies. And all this just goes to show the extent to which he is trying to build a certain culture. He hates that word, by the way. He hates the word culture just because it's overused, and I think that people can kind of project whatever they want that word to mean onto it. He prefers to use the word environment, but he wants to create an environment that is football first, that is about winning football games. And whatever else may come of that will come of it, but he wants to put a product out there that ultimately the fans who he knows very well in Detroit and the Lions fans around the country who maybe have been displaced from Detroit but still understand the ethos and kind of essence of that city. He's trying to build a team that those people can be proud of. And that is ultimately the reason why we root for laundry. You know, that's what we do as sports fans. We see a player in a uniform that we identify with, that we have supported, and we see that player wearing that same uniform, and that's the player that's going to be our champion out there on the field, because we can't do it. We're mere civilians, right? We're mere civilians that can only, we don't have the physical tool set, especially in the sport of football, to actually go out there and do it ourselves as much as we may want to, and we may have trained earlier, you know, in when we were younger, in high school, playing football, whatever. You're trying to become that person. You just can't do it, but there's somebody out there who you feel like can represent you, and just and just connects with you in some way. And that is where the Falcons need to ask themselves questions. Who are the Falcons? What do the Falcons represent? And I'm not talking about, some political answer to that question. I'm talking about what human characteristics do the Falcons represent in their fan base, and why? Why does, I can't help but think, when I compare what I saw at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, by the way, I said this in one of the post-game shows that I've done recently, where I said, it was another October football game, where the crowd was not like going crazy, like it was not a loud, particularly hostile environment in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. And it's not like I'm saying that to trash the Falcons. Like I say, I grew up a Falcons fan. I still consider myself a Falcons fan, even in this job. And I think that, a lot of people who are you guys who are also Falcons fans can take this on and say, yeah, like it's not the same environment it has been in the Georgia Dome, despite the fact, it's not also a criticism of Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Mercedes-Benz Stadium is an amazing facility. It's almost like a wonder of the world at this point. When it's interesting to see people who come and travel, visit from elsewhere. Like I know some of the Bills reporters were down here and just marveling at the place, and it really is a marvel. But why is the environment the way that it is in October and November, especially when the team is struggling, obviously? And I see that, and I compare it to what I see at Sanford Stadium when they're playing Texas, and it's just absolutely electric. And the people care with every fiber of their being, and they are into that football game. They are there for football. They may be a little drunk. They may be a lot drunk. They're having a good time, etc. But they are so focused on winning that game, and they care so much about that football team in front of them. And it's true with Georgia Tech too. I'm not trying to single Georgia out. I'm not a Georgia fan, by the way. I'm not trying to single them out as kind of being special in this instance. But there is something in general, I would say, about college football, and they have a natural advantage in this sense where people go and spend formative years of their lives at this institution, and they go to football games while they're there themselves, and so that gives them this bond to this football team where they really care and they really identify with the players, the results, and everything that represents the coaches. How the players and coaches represent them on it during a game, outside of the game. I feel like Georgia fans, if you were to ask them about Kirby Smart, obviously they love him because he wins, but there's something else about Kirby Smart that people here really resonate with. And it's not even his Southern drawl maybe is part of it, but there's just an intensity and a passion, and kind of he doesn't care how he might come off at times or look at times, that people appreciate, because they know that he only cares about winning, and that's what they also care about. So they have that identity. And why is that not replicated with the Atlanta Falcons right now? Has it ever been replicated by the Falcons under any ownership? I mean, I've been to a lot of Atlanta Falcons football games as a fan. Um, I didn't go to as many, if any. Yeah, maybe I don't know if I ever attended Mercedes-Benz Stadium as a fan of the Falcons, and the reason why was because one of the people that I would continually go with was one of my best friends growing up, and he had a season ticket he had 2 season tickets to the Falcons, which he got for as a Christmas gift one year when he was a kid, and then ultimately, he starts paying it himself. He's mowing lawns in the summer to afford these season tickets, and he's keeping up with the team. He's keeping up with the team. When they moved stadiums, he couldn't afford to keep his season ticket, so he had to give it up. And you know, it's so sad because he was as diehard of a Falcons fan as anyone else out there. Like we were been to every single Falcons playoff game that they were in those 2010s. And he's not that big of a Falcons fan. In fact, all the Falcons do is really kind of frustrate him at this point in time. And I don't want to say his exact words yesterday that were coming out. The worst part about it is that those words weren't like fiery condemnation of the team. It was more kind of apathy, which is the worst. So the Falcons need to ask themselves these questions about the identity of this team and the values that they espouse in themselves. And again, I'm not talking about anything but what values bring about the kind of winning culture they want to have here. And only when you figure those things out, like the Lions were able to do thanks to Chris Spielman, are you then able to go out and find the right people to bring into these roles as the GM, as the head coach. Because I've been thinking, like, this really kind of hit me, and I had a conversation with somebody, actually in the wake of this Panthers game, who kind of mentioned the Lions to me, and I've been thinking about them a lot and researching them a lot, really, up until I'm recording this podcast. And before that, I was thinking about, who would succeed Raheem Morris? Clint Kubiak? He seems like a great fit. Seahawks offensive coordinator. Seahawks are having an emerging season with Sam Darnold. Clint Kubiak likes this kind of downfield passing attack, this outside zone. Feels like it would scheme really well with the Falcons, what they've got. Okay, yeah. But does that even matter? Would it matter? Would he be any different than Raheem Morris, than Arthur Smith, than any of these other coaches who have come through these doors? And for as optimistic as anyone may have been about them arriving, have failed to have success. And it's not even about the on-field success. What I want in the Falcons, more than a winning record or whatever, but I understand that this is only going to come with a winning record, is I want a city that's on fire for the Falcons, I want sports bars to be packed with people watching Falcons. Okay, that's probably just a different generation of fan, but you know what I mean. Like, I want us to be fired up about this team, and I want people who live in this city to want to be Falcons fans, and for them to be proud of the team that goes out there and represents them. Atlanta's a transplant city. That's what they say. Okay, let's take that on face value. Why are they like? Why do people come here and not want to change their teams or their kids? The parents who are may have moved here from Wisconsin and they're a Packers fan. Will have their kid grow up as a Packers fan as well, because they like you have to grow the fan base, and you only grow the fan base when the product is obviously one that's going to entice people to want to come and see, but just one that makes people proud to support that organization, and proud of the way that they represent you. And you can, again, kind of just proudly wear your Falcon stuff. And I am thankful that I did experience a version of that, like, during the Matt Ryan era. It wasn't always smooth, but there were aspects of that. I don't know if the organization, if it's ever really truly been kind of like at the level of some organizations, and I don't know if you don't have to replicate exactly what the Packers are to Green Bay, because there are aspects of Green Bay, the city, that are just completely different, and just are, again, there's just different characteristics of the relationships that football teams have with their fan bases and with their cities. But I would stress that it's not just the city of Atlanta. Like, again, Georgia has this very wide appeal to people in this state, whether you're in the city of Atlanta or whether you're in the city of Statesboro. I call it, or Social Circle, or wherever, like, I'm just trying to think of the most random cities I could possibly think of at that time. But how do the Falcons get that broad appeal where people want to be involved? They want to, you know, be part of the culture that they establish and actively represent day in, day out. And so only until you start to establish that are you really truly going to be on fire. The head coach and the GM play a part of that, but they have to be aligned and have a vision for what that culture, what that environment is, and what that looks like for their players, for their fans, for all their partners and stakeholders that they have. It's a big question. Again, I'm just kind of throwing it out there because it's just something I've been thinking about today, and I don't even have the answers. I would love to hear what any of you guys have to think about some of the stuff I've said in the comments, but I don't know. That's where my head's been at on a day like today, where the news is so bad, and it almost puts when it almost is putting a damper, maybe not even almost, certainly throws next season into question. We have to figure out how we can be happy as Falcons fans, no matter what happens, And by the way, I've also heard this conversation about, well, what head coach is going to want to take the job? What GM is going to want to take the job? Well, I don't know. But I damn well know that the best GM for this team is not going to be one that just has the maximum amount of credentials ticked and is willing to come here. The best GM for this team is someone who will bite kneecaps to get here, and will be proud to represent the Falcons and the city and create a team that makes them proud too. So anyway, that's all I got for you today. May pose some of this stuff to a guest that we're going to have on the show later this week. That would be one Mark Zinno. I know I got a lot of rage in the comments when I had Zinno on before the season, because he's a pessimist, and he certainly is. He certainly is. But maybe that balances me out a little bit. It's a good kind of, devil's advocate for me. No, but I appreciate Mark a lot, Zeno a lot. In fact, we usually have a phone call and kind of debrief after press conferences, especially ones where he's grilling Raheem, as he typically does on the Monday press conferences, which I know a lot of people like. So going to have him on. I don't know exactly what we're going to talk about, but obviously we're going to think about some of these questions I've posed today, and also kind of where the team goes from here, because there's a lot of questions. So thank you guys so much for listening. Again, you can watch the show if you are listening to this on podcast. You want to watch? It's on 929 The Game's YouTube channel. Please click a like if you are watching on YouTube, because more of these videos will pop into your algorithm, and other content creators. It'll signal you as a Falcons being an interest for you, and YouTube will dangle more Falcons out in front of you. So definitely do that, and leave a comment again if you have any opinions on what I said today. You can also get a podcast version of me on Joe Patrick on football. Just search that wherever you get your podcasts. It should pop up for you. So thank you guys so much for listening today, and we'll talk to you next time.